Coming up on today's show, Tammy Nelson, PhD, is a sex and relationship expert, an international speaker, and an author and a licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years of experience working with individuals and couples. In private practice, she focuses on helping people of all ages, orientations, and genders find love, healing, and passion. Dr. Tammy Nelson is the director of the Integrative Sex Therapy Institute and has been a licensed sex and relationship therapist in practice for decades. She teaches at several universities, is a TEDx speaker, and is the host of the podcast, The Trouble with Sex. She's the author of many books, including her most recent, Open Monogamy, A Guide to Co-Creating Your Ideal Relationship Agreement. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up, my conversation with Dr. Tammy Nelson. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am really excited to be meeting and talking with Dr. Tammy Nelson, who is the author of many books, the latest of which is Open Monogamy, A Guide to Co-Creating Your Ideal Relationship Agreement. So welcome to our show, and I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've already shared your bio, but I'd love to have you introduce yourself in your own words.
Sure. Well, I'm a sex and couples therapist. I've been doing this probably 35 years. I haven't stopped to count for a while. Kind of me. I do intensives for couples and retreats for people in all kinds of relationship formats. And I am a ketamine therapist. And I've written 6 books. I'm a TEDx speaker, and I'm host of the podcast, The Trouble with Sex. I also train other therapists to be sex and relationship therapists through my Integrative Sex Therapy Institute. I really think it's important that all therapists have training and can first of all, talk about sex, and second of all, understand where we are in our contemporary world of relationships, right? That they should at least have a language around that.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's impressive roster of everything that you do. And thank you for the work that you do, because I definitely come across in my clients where they have attempted to work with different therapists who just had no training whatsoever in, coloring outside the lines of monogamy. And that can definitely cause some issues or certainly some frustration. So I appreciate all the work that you've been doing for a long time now. So I'd love it if my listeners could get to know you a little bit, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to ask you, especially given the nature of your work around new monogamy and different things of that nature, and talking about sex, which is partly why I even created this podcast, because I love to create a platform where we can openly have those discussions. For you, when you were growing up, whether it was when you were younger or maybe, who knows, in college, was there either a moment or a series of moments when you knew that maybe you were just going to be a little bit different than the other people around you in some way, shape, or form, possibly coloring outside of the lines of heterosexual monogamy, or maybe your interest in wanting to talk about sex in a world that sometimes doesn't want to talk about sex? Like, how would you answer that?
Well, I certainly grew up in a very non-normative family. I was raised by a single mother, and she was very feminist, and I watched her have a series of relationships, most of which failed, but she was trying to make things work and trying to figure it out, working several jobs, trying to support kids and trying to squeeze in love and romance in there. And I've probably been a therapist since I was a little kid, when my neighbors used to come over and sit around in a circle, and I would, try to fix all their problems, which is also a dysfunction from my childhood. But I think as a therapist, what I realized training as a couples therapist first is no one ever talked about sex. Like graduate school, postgraduate school, I had a million letters after my name, which is another dysfunction. Still trying to prove to my mother that I'm okay, even though she's. But even in all those certifications and all those training programs, I mean, really, literally, no one talked about sex. And even in medical schools, where I've lectured, they give them like 15 minutes of education around how to talk about sex. And so I got really curious about why, if we're talking about relationships and romantic, emotional relationships, why we're not doing that, why we're colluding with this idea of don't talk about it. So I wrote a book about how to talk about sex with each other. And then I pursued a doctorate degree in sexology because I felt like even though all of my mentors and the people I was looking up to said, oh, you just work on the relationship and the sex will fix itself, I found, with all due respect, that that wasn't true. It's actually the opposite. If you work on people's sex life, their relationships get better and then people stay together and they last longer. And there's a lot of ways to work on a relationship. There's many different types of agreements that people can make that instead of trading their partner in for someone else, like they picked the wrong person, maybe they just picked the wrong agreement.
Mm. Yeah, I love how you highlighted that I definitely see that. I mean, obviously we know what the divorce rates are, in America. So I think there can be that common idea that we can, we chose the wrong person. I have a history before I realized there was this thing called polyamory, that I was a cheating serial monogamist. So I was definitely doing that, trading in one person for another. There was just cheating involved, which I know is probably some of the things that you talk about in your work. So I think that's really interesting about having the, possibly the wrong agreement. So it sounds like this is something that has been close to your heart maybe for a while, even when you were growing up, like you wanted to help people, you wanted to open up the conversation. So it sounds like this has been something that's been very special to you for most of your life. Was that how you would describe that?
I don't think I've ever judged people for how they have relationships. I've always thought any kind of relationship is a bonus. Like it's fascinating how people make any of them work because I never saw them work growing up. And so the fact that we could get creative to make them work, the nuclear family experiment it failed. I mean, it's not working anymore in our technological economy. So that was never sort of my guide of what was this normative way of having a relationship. So I didn't, maybe because I grew up outside the box, I didn't have that defining idea of what it was supposed to look like. So I think I've been more flexible about what it could look like. And that doesn't mean I didn't get married and have kids, and then got divorced and got married again. So I've sort of explored all the sides of it. My first husband now has passed away. With my second husband, we raised all our kids together. And then we had what a lot of people have, what I consider a second adolescence. Like kids grow up and you sort of revisit, all right, what do we want now? Like, what do we want in our sex lives? What do we want in our monogamy agreement? How are we going to be flexible and fluid in order to stay together forever? Because that's a long time. And we're expected to stay sexual well into our 80s. So it's not like it used to be when you like turned 60, went into menopause and fell off a cliff and then you died.
Yeah, and I feel that because I'm 55 and I am post-menopause. So so I totally know what you're talking about, including that, sex is fun and pleasure is good for you. So I would like to keep that sexual aspect of my life. So and I appreciate therefore a lot of your work here. So it sounds like this is work that you've been studying and doing, like you said, for 35 years, and you've done so much work in terms of these books that you've written. I'd love to just looking at some of the titles here. I'm curious about was it out of the main books that are related to relationships and sex, was it Getting the Sex You Want, Shed Your Inhibitions and Reach New Heights of Passion Together? Was that one of the older works out of that genre? Is that right?
That was one of the first books I wrote. I wrote a book about eating disorders, and I found
Mm,
first, and I found that a lot of women's cravings and their body image issues, they would stand in front of the kitchen cabinets and go, "Oh my God, I have a craving for something. Is it chocolate? Is it ice cream?" And what I
mm.
realized for a lot of women, it was sex. Like
Oh, wow.
that was the craving. And that we as women don't in women's bodies don't really recognize what that feels like or what that meant, or we're not taught. We're taught that if we have a feeling towards someone, like a kid on the bus when we're growing up, then we must have a crush on them because that's what we see in the media. Like, oh, I must love them, must be in love with them. I have this longing for them. We don't get this like immediate erection that says I want to have sex with them, which is what the boys learn. And
Mm, mhm,
so then as a therapist, I was recognizing that people came in for one of two reasons, either the neglect of their erotic life. They've been taught that if you just work on the relationship, your sex life will take care of itself. If you just take care of the kids, you work on your companionship and you're good friends and well attached, then it'll all work out. Well, it doesn't. You have to work more on your erotic life even than your companionship. So I wrote
mm,
Getting the Sex You Want for those people who had neglected that part of their life and really wanted to increase the passion and sort of jazz it up. I don't think it's true that the longer you're together, the more your erotic life has to dissipate and go away. I think the longer you're together, the more familiar you become, and the more familiar you are with each other, the more family you are, and the less you want to have sex with your family. So
mm,
there are some
mhm,
things to do about that, and that was that book. And then I realized that the other reason that people were coming in, not just for neglect of their erotic life, but for trauma in their erotic life, like infidelity, like betrayal.
mhm,
And so I wrote The New Monogamy, which was redefining your relationship after infidelity. So it was taking a look at how could you sort of reboot your relationship without having to, cancel it. And a monogamy agreement just is a continuum of many options. You could be very traditionally monogamous, or you could be wide open polyamorous. But there's a lot of shades of gray in there. And then I wrote When You're the One Who Cheats, because no one seemed to focus on the person that was having the affair. Like, I love what you said. Like, I just found myself sort of cheating instead of understanding I could have it all because we're not those options. Which is why I wrote Open Monogamy, because people are like, wait, do I have to have an affair to talk about a monogamy agreement? Like, can't we do it without a crisis, without any trauma? And I really encourage everyone to talk about what they want their monogamy to look like, because, we're not taught about that either. We're not taught to say, I promise to love and honor you and tell you every time I have a TikTok video sent to my social media. The
mhm,
world has changed a lot.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. This is incredible work. I would really love to dive into each one of these books. And I definitely, of course, see an overlap in terms of possible infidelity or trauma, and a focus on healing the relationship and also healing the sex life, and ideally staying together. And I love how you said that rebooting versus canceling the relationship. For each of those books, the Getting the Sex You Want, the New Monogamy, When You're the One Who Cheats, and then your latest Open Monogamy, like, if you had to, like, just describe, like, what are the kind of the differences or between them, or the target audience, maybe it's more like a global target audience for all of them, but how would you maybe make distinctions between each of those books if somebody was thinking, wow, that sounds right up my alley, but I'm not sure which one to read first?
Well, I mean, I don't want to make this commercial, but I do think that Getting the Sex You Want is a good sort of a workbook almost. It has exercises in it for couples, or you can use it if you're in a throuple or any relationship agreement structure. It really gives you some guidance about how to talk to each other, how to really bring that erotic energy in, how to talk about your fantasies, how to decide whether you want to take those fantasies into action and how to do that. It just brings more sexiness into your relationship. The books, if you're struggling around infidelity or betrayal, I think the New Monogamy and When You're the One Who Cheats are great guides as well. And then I think everyone should talk about open monogamy. It's not just for people who are monogamous. It just means that you have a primary partner or a central agreement with someone, but your monogamy room can be super flexible and wide open. And I don't define it, but I'm giving you the language, if you will, the exercises to define it. How do you even have the conversation? How do you bring it up? What do you do before you do anything? What do you do if it doesn't go well? What do you do if you want to do more? What do you do if you want to shut it down? I think we need to have conversations with everybody, all of our partners.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I was growing up, I definitely had partners where, I mean, if I even had a close male friend, they would consider that cheating and get extremely upset, right? So I think there, like you said, there's everything from where it could be an abusive situation, to more like accepting that we can all have friends of the opposite gender, and what is that like, and what's the difference between emotional cheating versus sexual cheating. So I really can appreciate the hard work that you put into each of these works. I'd love to ask, like, if there, and when you were thinking of these, like, was there a moment, like a light bulb moment when maybe you decided to write the first book, Getting the Sex You Want? Like, was there like a situation maybe with your clients, or a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I need to write this book, or, that light bulb moment for any of them? Because they're all fascinating.
Well, for sure, it came out of my work with women and body image stuff, realizing need to recognize when they feel what they feel. But more likely, I was a imago relationship therapist. It's a type of imago counseling, and there was nothing about sex in any of the literature or any of the research. And so I took what I felt was like a really powerful form of couples therapy that I did not invent. It was from Harville Hendrix' book, Getting the Love You Want. And I applied those principles to talk about sex. I think there are some ways to have conversations that make it safe, and it sort of falls along the line of like nonviolent communication, where you mirror each other and validate and empathize and really hold the space. It's not about agreeing. It's not about coercing your partner into doing anything or getting them to come to your side of the bridge. I mean, it really is about empathy. And I found that if we don't talk about our sexual needs and desires and fantasies, the other person, first of all, has no idea, and they have maybe a 50-50 chance of guessing. So it's not their fault if they get it wrong. So we, in order to feel satisfied ourselves, have to be able to communicate what we want and need. And that's hard for most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that you played off that title too. And because I did read the book, Getting the Love You Want. So thank you for really taking that to the next level. And again, making it more acceptable, to have a conversation around sex and giving people a framework to be able to do that. That's awesome. And I'd love to, when we talk about, and I love that you have two books that deal with infidelity and cheating. And of course, for our listeners, there's no judgment. I was a cheater for about 12 or 14 years back in, I guess that would have been the 90s, when I just didn't know there was another way. I didn't know that I could have my cake and eat it too, and be able to, I didn't have the language to be able to have those conversations. But there's still, of course, even though there is a growing awareness about polyamory and open relationships or relationship anarchy, of course, there is still tons of cheating and infidelity. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts from your research. Why, like, from your perspective and your work, why do you think are some of the top reasons why people do cheat, even though they do know that there are some of these options? And we can kind of, take the conversation from there.
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is that eroticism by its nature is forbidden, illicit, naughty. It's the opposite of safe, attached, family. So people are always going to cheat. It's just always going to be a thing because there's something about that illicitness that can be hot. Now, if you can get that forbiddenness in your current committed partnerships, then there's a way to cross over. And the other thing I want to say is when we have an affair or even in an open relationship, it's not so much that people are looking for another person, it's they're looking to be another person.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say that again. It's not that you're looking for another person, you're looking to be another person. So it makes total sense that with one partner you're this and with another partner you're that. The crisis happens when you feel like you can't live in integrity with all those parts of you, that you have to hide, split off, compartmentalize pieces of yourself instead of being able to say to a partner, look, this is all of me. Maybe I can't, be all of this here with you, but I need to be all of myself, if you will.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating, and that really resonates with me, both my experience from the past and also from talking to people, because I love what you said earlier again about when I work with different clients, sometimes they start to feel they are unable to heal from the infidelity, and there can be a lot of blaming. I'm blaming you because you're the one that cheated. Well, I'm blaming you because you weren't meeting my needs, right? So I love that. To me, there's an idea of hope in the work that you're doing, and instead of, as you said, canceling or getting divorced, and finding a pathway forward. So from, again, your work and your research, maybe even like, even if it's an anecdotal statistic, how many relationships where there has been infidelity do you think are able to, if they are willing to do the work, and they are willing to both show up to do that, that can heal and then find a new pathway forward versus when it's kind of too far gone?
Well, I would say that all affairs are either wake up or break up moments in a relationship. So some people have an affair to be what I call a can opener. They want out, but they don't know how to do it, or they want their partner to break up with them, or they want to swing from branch to branch. There's a reason that they're doing it, maybe consciously or unconsciously, because they really do want their relationship to end. Those are not wake up calls, those are breakup affairs. But the majority of affairs are really moments that can bring a couple to a new understanding of, like, what do we need? What was going on up until now? How did we get here? Not why did you do this to me, but how did we get here? Mm. And can the cheating partner integrate that part of themselves into the current relationship? Or do they feel like they have to shut it down, cut it off, bury it in order to be with their person? And are they blaming their person for that? Like, oh, she would never be into that, or he doesn't like that, or he would never want to do that, or he doesn't have that kind of sexual appetite, or sometimes we blame our partner for not being able to integrate those parts of ourselves when maybe that's not true. Maybe we could ask them. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a real wake-up call for both partners, like the person that was cheated on, to be like, wow, maybe I could, as a result of my partner becoming someone else, I could find those other parts of me that I've had to shut down to be in this marriage or this partnership. Mm-hmm. So it can be a huge turning point. I don't think, the one caveat is I don't think you can go back. I hear people say, if we could just go back to the way things were before the affair. There's no going back. Like, that marriage that you had is over. It's like a part of your life, and you have to grieve the vision that you had of it. And then you have a choice. You can have a new monogamy or a new marriage with the same person, or you can cut it off and go off, discover a different life. But you can't go back, because then you just end up here. You can't cut off that part of yourself in order to make your partner happy, because then that part just goes underground. Eventually it'll resurface, or you resent the hell out of your partner for not being able to be a whole self.
Hmm. Yeah, that really resonates with me and makes a whole lot of sense. And I love the way that you said that it could, it there's intent behind what's happening, and sometimes the intent might be, I'm kind of passive aggressively blowing this up versus maybe this is where we really need to take a look at what we're doing and redefine what we're doing. And like you said, have an awareness that what we had before that doesn't exist. We need to create something new, and I can see how that's certainly where you could come in, is to give them a framework and some hope that they can create something new. Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
really beautiful.
sometimes I have had a lot of people say, we're better than ever since this affair. Like not, it's not a death sentence. I think it really depends. If you have a good therapist, it depends on if you're doing the good work, and it depends on how open-minded you can be to a new vision of a new future.
Hmm. Yeah. When do you think there's any sort of timeline or guidelines for people where there has been infidelity and they're wondering, like, can we heal? How long will this take? Can we figure this out on our own, or should we work with a professional? Do you have any thoughts on how you might respond to that?
I think it depends on the type of affair. Like, people cheat for different reasons in different ways, right? So the way I define an affair is there's three parts. There's some kind of outside relationship, there's some kind of sexual connection, and there's dishonesty. So maybe it's with a sex worker online, you never see their face. Maybe you're spending money that your partner doesn't know about. Maybe it's masturbation that your partner finds threatening. Maybe, it's a full-blown love affair, parallel marriage with someone else. Um, all of which is going to feel different depending on whether it's disclosed or discovered. Like, do you go home and tell your partner, "Oh my God, I met this person at a party and we made out and I feel so guilty and let's talk about it," versus your partner finding emails to someone and then gaslighting you, like, "I don't know what you're talking about. That's not mine." Um, Depending on all those things can really determine the healing process after an affair.
Hmm. Yeah, that definitely resonates with me, as well as when there is kind of a cover up that seems to be happening as well. I'm curious, in your work, do you ever have different situations where you realize maybe there is some gaslighting or maybe some perpetual dishonesty, and you realize that that relationship probably isn't going to work out, and you sometimes, I know it's not your job to tell them what to do, but how often does that maybe show up in your work?
You know, I have a hard time with coercion. So if I feel like a partner is coercing someone into like an open relationship, like, if you don't do this, I'm going to cheat on you. Or if you don't do this, I'm going to leave you. Or, um, an open relationship is not an excuse to continue an affair. Like, it, that's not really an open relationship. That's like a non-consensual, non-monogamous relationship. And so it's not so much even the gaslighting as much as it is the coercion. Because gaslighting, I really feel like I can work with the person who feels gaslit to trust their intuition. Because after an affair, the person who was cheated on really struggles with trust around their own intuition versus their fear that it could happen again. So that's what we would work with. Like, what is your intuition telling you about what they're saying? Well, go deep inside into your body, down into your gut. Like, what's the truth here? Because sometimes people don't give others the opportunity or the sort of container to take the space to admit what they already know but can't face.
Hmm. So a lot of the work is helping the person who has been cheated on to build their own intuition and maybe their trust in themselves from the inside out, and then kind of see how that works in the relationship.
Because then they can confront the partner. I can support them to find their voice and their power, and then they can confront their partner if they feel gaslit or if they feel like something's not right. So it's not me saying, okay, you're full of shit. I don't believe you. It's
Hmm.
I've said that before, by the way, but it's not me saying that normally. It would be me empowering the partner who feels like they're being lied to.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. Um, a lot of times people will come to me and, in general and from infidelity and wondering, what is the definition of trust? How, like, what are, if you had to maybe name like just a couple ways to think about trust and how to rebuild it, what comes to mind that you would like to share here?
Well, we're in interesting times, right? I mean, this is the first time in history you could cheat on your partner lying in bed next to them. Like, we really, this is challenging.
Hmm.
We have to really define for each other what cheating is. I mean, to me, I don't care if my partner watches pornography and masturbates, but to somebody else, walking in on that can feel devastating. I mean, devastating. So I can empathize with the definition that everyone has around betrayal is so widely different in today's technology world, sending a picture of yourself in a bathing suit or clicking on someone's Instagram that, is like a, what do they call it? Like a thirst pic or something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that cheating? Is it cheating to talk to your ex, to go out with someone for a lunch from work, like really talking at length about what monogamy means to you? And is monogamy, even in an open, what maybe someone would consider an open relationship, what does that mean? Does that mean we only do things together? Does that mean when you go out on a date, you need to come home and tell me everything? Does that mean if you have coffee with that person, then you cheated on me because you were only supposed to have sex with them? Like, how do we figure out what commitment really means? And because unless you can do that, then there's going to be this implicit assumption of what cheating is for both people or more people. And
Mm-hmm.
it may not be the same. Like, we think, oh, it's easy, just don't sleep with anyone else. Well, that's not easy, particularly if you're in an open relationship. That's not easy to define. So, more explicit you can be about what you want, what you don't want, what your boundaries are, what your red lines are, what your values are, the more explicit you can be about all that, the less chance there is that you're going to be betrayed or hurt.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And that leads me to something that popped up while you were talking earlier, which is if there has been an affair with person A, and then that couple does decide, look, we are willing to find a way forward. We understand that what we had before doesn't exist, and we want to find a way forward. Um, do you think it's possible? And if so, maybe like how, if that the person who cheated with person A still wants to see that person? Like, because I heard what you said earlier, like, is that really an open relationship? But if they're both on the same page and they want to move forward, do you think it is possible to heal, rebuild trust, and for that person to still continue that relationship under certain parameters? Or do you think that kind of needs to disappear for it to still be on a healthy foundation, to heal and move forward? And I'm sure you have thoughts based on your work when this does come up for you, because I definitely see it a lot as well.
I feel like this is a question that you're asking for a friend.
It's not in my life, but I see it with people, and I guess we can just have an honest conversation. I mean, often what I will recommend is that couple really work on rebuilding their trust, and rebuilding that foundation, and seeing if they're able to come to any agreement, if they could still keep a friendship with that other person, but sometimes that's not possible. But like you, I often am facilitating a conversation between them to help them sort that out, because it's, again, I view it's not my place to tell them what to do, but to give them guidelines and me to facilitate that conversation. And I've seen it work both ways, but your experience of, may overlap with mine, but also could be completely different. And and I haven't written all the books that you have.
Maybe you should. You should write a memoir.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd read it. Well, I think what's important is that relationships end when they end. So if you try to stop your partner from having an affair, like being in a relationship, that doesn't necessarily take the juice out of it, right? Sometimes it makes it more juicy, and then you long for that person and you feel more attracted because of that distance between you, right? We're attracted to someone in the space in between us. So there's room for longing, which is why, if your partner's sitting on the couch with you every night, not so much. But if there's space to be attracted, that's why affairs are so fun, because you get to think about each other, you get to make a date, you get to plan it. It's all exciting, you get to text each other. And then if you say, no, I don't want you to do that anymore, well, those feelings don't necessarily go away. They just go underground and maybe get more powerful. And the risk of that is that then you have a parentified relationship. So now you're telling your partner, you can't do that, you're being bad. And now I have to come up with consequences, and I have to oversee your phone, and I have to watch all your behaviors to make sure you're not being a bad partner, and come up with a punishment. Like, that's totally parentifying the relationship. And I can tell you that a parentified relationship is totally desexual, right? Because you're going back to the point that you don't want to have sex with your family. So you can't be in charge of whether or not your partner is going to stop cheating. Like, that has to be a decision that they have to come up with. You can have your own boundaries and say, I can't be with a partner who's lying to me.
Mm-hmm.
Or I need to be with a partner who tells me that our relationship comes first, regardless of what other relationships they're in. Or, we have to agree on what the sort of the guardrails are, like the red lines. And, boundaries are not the requests that we put on another person. I have my boundaries, you have your boundaries. But if I tell you what your boundaries are, then that's just being controlling. It's not being
Right.
Right. I can't tell you what your boundaries are. And boundaries can shift, by the way. Maybe my boundaries are, okay, you just stop texting this person all the time. I don't care if you sleep with them, but, put your phone away when we're together. So I try to get people to look at what's really bothering them. And that usually has 4 areas: time, attention, affection, and sex. So are you pissed off or upset that this person's affair is taking time away from you? Or is it taking their attention, like they're sitting with their phone while you're having dinner and they're texting someone else? Or is it really about the sex? Has it reduced the amount that you're touching each other? Because usually people have opinions about those 4 things. They're like, they may not be the same in a relationship. You might need more time. They might need more affection. But then at least you have the guidelines for a conversation between you. So it's not just, I'm jealous, or you need to break up with them. It's more like, this is what I feel like it's taking away from me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a lot of times I'll talk about jealousy in terms of the idea that I'm going to get less time, attention, affection, or sex, or, none at all. Like, I'm never going to have that again, or I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose it, so I really like that framework and thinking of it in those terms. And the fact that there isn't a clean cut answer, so kind of similar to me, it sounds like you're kind of looking at it from a holistic way, and then helping that couple to really think through that, realizing if you say, don't eat that cookie, they're going to want to eat the cookie even more, right? Which is typical human nature, right? And
the therapist to tell them to not eat cookies. Like, I don't really have control over it there.
Right, exactly. Well, amazing. Well, I know we need to start to wrap up the call. So is there any message you would like to leave our listeners with, or maybe any question I didn't ask that you would like to share some wisdom on?
Well, I want to be clear that I'm not pathologizing infidelity. I think, look, there's 80 million members of Ashley Madison worldwide. Like, people are doing it. You know what I mean? And if so many people are doing it, there's a need for something. And maybe it's, a large portion of them say that if they could have an open relationship, they would do it. I think this is not necessarily about sex. I really do think it's a crisis of integrity. And I don't mean that from a moral perspective. I mean that from an honesty perspective. Like, how do we keep our promises? If you make a promise, how do you keep it or change the promise? Like, how do you be flexible, fluid, transparent about what you're doing or what you want? So, because the pain is really about, you lied to me. You said you would do this. Now you're doing this. Or the pain is, I'm lying to my partner and that's crushing me. It has nothing to do with the sex, really. It really is about lying about the sex or lying about the feelings. So really we are working here to live in integrity with ourselves, not lie to ourselves about what we want and need, and not have to lie to anybody else either. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Not easy. Look at the culture that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was really beautifully said, and thanks for underscoring that. So I really appreciate you reaching out and taking the time to talk with me today. I'm just going to hopefully read correctly all the list of your books for our listeners. So the most recent, Open Monogamy, A Guide to Co-Creating Your Ideal Relationship Agreement. When You're the One Who Cheats, 10 Things You Need to Know. Also, The New Monogamy, Redefining Your Relationship After Infidelity. And Getting the Sex You Want, Shed Your Inhibitions and Reach New Heights of Passion Together. And what I didn't think was related to our listeners, but I love how you said that sometimes when people have a yearning to eat, it might be around sex. So I'll say the last title as well, which is What's Eating You, a workbook for teens with anorexia, bulimia, and other eating disorders. And you said your most recent project is integrative sex and couples therapy as well. So thank you for being here. How can everyone find you and your work and these amazing books?
So they can find me at drtammynelson.com, DRTAMMY Nelson.com. They can also email me through that. And actually, let me think. If they email me and tell me that they heard me on your show and say, oh, I heard you talking to Kitty, I'll send a sample I have a date night card deck, which is a bunch of cards that have questions on them to open these kind of dialogues. I'll send you a sample of a few of those date night card decks, and they'll just email me and say you heard Kitty and how brilliant she is and that you liked our podcast.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for the amazing work you're putting out there. It is so incredibly needed, and you're welcome back to come on the show anytime you like.
Thanks, Kitty. This was really fun. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.